The woman who tuned pianos at the Harborview Grand Hotel had a secret. Not a small one, either. The kind of secret that could make headlines if anyone ever found out. But nobody paid attention to her. That was exactly how she wanted it. Her name was Elena Marchetti, and 15 years ago she had been one of the most famous concert pianists in Europe. She had played in the greatest halls in the world: Vienna, Paris, London, New York. When she walked onto a stage, people held their breath. When she played, some of them cried. Critics called her a genius. They said her fingers did not just press keys. They said she spoke through the piano, telling stories without words. But that was a long time ago. A lifetime ago, really. 3 years before she came to this small coastal town in Maine, everything changed. She was in the back of a taxi in Rome, heading to a rehearsal, when a delivery truck ran a red light. The crash was violent, glass shattered, metal twisted. When she woke up in the hospital 2 days later, the doctors told her she was lucky to be alive. But Elena did not feel lucky. She felt broken. The nerves in her left hand had been badly damaged. The doctors said she might never play again, not the way she used to. For months, she could barely move her fingers. Simple tasks became impossible. Buttoning a shirt, holding a coffee cup, writing her own name. The pain was constant, sharp, and exhausting. But worse than the physical pain was the emptiness she felt inside. Music had been her entire life. Without it, she did not know who she was anymore. She tried rehabilitation, hour after hour, day after day. She worked with therapists who stretched her fingers and made her do exercises that felt pointless. Some days, she wanted to give up. Some nights, she sat alone in her apartment and stared at her piano, unable to bring herself to touch it. She was afraid that if she tried to play and failed, she would lose the last piece of hope she had left. It took 3 years. 3 long, painful, lonely years. Slowly, feeling returned to her hand. Slowly, she began to play again. Not in concert halls, not for audiences, just alone in her apartment with the curtains drawn. She played simple pieces at first, children's songs, scales, things she had learned when she was 5 years old. It was humbling, it was frustrating, but it was also, in a strange way, healing. Still, she could not imagine going back to her old life. The thought of standing on a stage again, of having thousands of eyes on her, made her feel sick. What if she made a mistake? What if her hand failed her in the middle of a performance? What if people looked at her with pity instead of admiration? She could not bear it. So she made a decision. She would disappear. She sold her apartment in Milan. She canceled her remaining contracts. She stopped answering calls from her manager, her friends, her family. She packed 2 suitcases and bought a one-way ticket to the United States. She chose Maine because it was far away from everything she knew, because it was quiet, because nobody there would recognize her face or her name. The town she settled in was small and peaceful. It sat on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, with rocky shores and a harbor full of fishing boats. The people were friendly, but not nosy. They waved when they passed her on the street, but they did not ask too many questions. She rented a tiny cottage near the water. She bought groceries at the local market. She walked along the beach in the early mornings, when the fog still hung low over the waves. She tried to build a new life, one day at a time. She found the job at the Harborview Grand Hotel by accident. She had gone there for lunch one afternoon, curious about the beautiful old building that sat on the cliff overlooking the harbor. In the lobby, she noticed a grand piano covered in dust. It was a beautiful instrument, a vintage model from the early 20th century, but it was badly out of tune. She could hear it the moment she walked past. It bothered her. A piano like that deserved better. She mentioned it to the front desk clerk, who shrugged and said they had been looking for someone to tune it for months. The last piano tuner in the area had retired, and nobody had been able to find a replacement. Elena hesitated. Then she heard herself say that she could do it. The hotel manager, a warm woman named Darlene with gray curls and kind eyes, was thrilled. She hired Elena on the spot. The pay was not much, but Elena did not need much. She had saved plenty of money during her years as a performer. What she needed was something to do, a reason to get out of bed, a way to stay connected to music without having to face the world she had left behind. So she became the piano tuner at the Harborview Grand Hotel. She came in twice a week, sometimes more when there were events. She wore plain clothes, gray cardigans, simple blouses, comfortable shoes. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a low bun. She wore reading glasses she did not really need, just because they made her look different. Ordinary. Forgettable. The wealthy guests who stayed at the hotel walked past her without a second glance. The staff knew her as a quiet, polite woman who did her job well and never caused any trouble. Nobody suspected that she had once performed for kings and presidents. Nobody knew that her hands had made audiences weep with joy. And that was fine with her. More than fine. It was exactly what she wanted. The hotel was preparing for its biggest event of the year, the annual charity gala. It happened every December, right before the holidays. Rich people came from all over the region to drink champagne, bid on expensive auction items, and feel good about donating money to a worthy cause. This year, the charity was a foundation that provided music education to children who could not afford lessons. The irony was not lost on Elena. She had been one of those children once, a long time ago. A little girl from a poor family in northern Italy who had learned to play on a second-hand keyboard her grandmother bought at a flea market. Elena watched the preparations from a distance. Workers hung crystal chandeliers. Florists arranged enormous bouquets of white roses. Caterers set up long tables covered in white linen. The hotel buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Everyone wanted the night to be perfect. The centerpiece of the gala was supposed to be a live piano performance during the auction. The hotel had hired a young pianist from a nearby conservatory. He was talented, everyone said, a rising star. He would play while the guests bid on a rare item, a restored Steinway grand piano from the 1920s. The combination of live music and the beautiful instrument was expected to drive the bidding higher than ever before. Elena tuned the Steinway herself, spending an entire afternoon making sure every note was perfect. She ran her fingers over the keys when no one was watching. The sound was rich and warm, like honey and sunlight. For a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to perform. The thrill of the stage, the connection with the audience, the way the music seemed to flow through her like electricity. Then she closed the lid, picked up her tools, and walked away. She had no idea that in just a few hours, everything was about to change. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. Snow had fallen the day before, covering the town in a thin white blanket that sparkled under the streetlights. The Harborview Grand Hotel looked like something from a postcard. Candles flickered in every window. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the circular driveway where expensive cars lined up one after another. Women in fur coats and glittering jewelry stepped out into the freezing air. Men in tailored suits offered their arms and escorted them inside. Elena was not supposed to be there that night. Her work was done. She had tuned the Steinway 2 days ago, checked it again yesterday, and confirmed that everything was perfect. There was no reason for her to come back, but something pulled her to the hotel anyway. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that the charity supported music education for children, a cause that touched her heart, or maybe deep down she just wanted to be near the piano one more time. She came in through the service entrance, the same door she always used. The kitchen was chaos. Cooks shouted orders. Waiters rushed past, carrying trays of champagne glasses. The air smelled like roasted meat and expensive perfume. Nobody noticed Elena slip through the back hallway and find a quiet corner near the storage room. From there, she could see the edge of the ballroom through a crack in the door. She could hear the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, the gentle notes of recorded classical music playing through the speakers. She planned to stay for just a few minutes, just long enough to see the guests arrive, to feel the energy of the evening, and then she would go home. Back to her cottage, back to her quiet life, back to being invisible. But then she heard the commotion. It started in the back hallway, near the loading dock. Voices, loud and panicked. Elena stepped out of her corner and walked toward the sound. A small crowd had gathered near the service entrance. 2 waiters, a security guard, and Darlene, the hotel manager, her face pale with shock. On the ground sat a young man in a black suit. He was clutching his right wrist, his face twisted in pain. His eyes were wet with tears. A woman in a catering uniform knelt beside him, holding a bag of ice wrapped in a towel. Blood seeped through the fabric. Elena moved closer, trying to understand what had happened. The young man was the pianist, the one hired to perform during the auction. He had arrived early to warm up, but the back steps were covered in ice. He had slipped and fallen hard. His wrist had taken the worst of it. Someone had already called for an ambulance. The paramedics were on their way, but everyone already knew the truth. He would not be playing tonight. Maybe not for months. Darlene stood frozen, her phone pressed to her ear. Elena could hear fragments of the conversation. She was calling other musicians, anyone who might be able to step in at the last minute. But it was December, just days before the holidays. Everyone was busy, everyone was booked. One by one, the answers came back the same. No. Sorry. Not available. The minutes ticked by. The gala was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours. The auction, the centerpiece of the entire evening, was supposed to feature live piano music. Without it, the organizers feared the night would fall flat. The Steinway was expected to sell for at least $50,000, maybe more. All of that money was supposed to go to the Children's Music Foundation, kids who could not afford instruments, kids who dreamed of learning to play but had no way to make it happen. Kids just like Elena had been, all those years ago. She watched Darlene's face crumble with each phone call. The woman was trying so hard to hold herself together, but Elena could see the cracks forming. Darlene had worked on this gala for months. She had poured her heart into every detail. And now, through no fault of her own, it was all falling apart. Elena felt something stir inside her chest, a feeling she had not allowed herself to have in a very long time. It was a pull, a whisper, a voice that told her she could help, that she should help. But another voice, louder and more familiar, told her to stay hidden, to walk away, to protect herself. She thought about what it would mean to step forward, to sit at that piano in front of 300 strangers, to play again after all these years of hiding. The thought made her hands tremble. Her mouth went dry. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. What if she failed? What if her hand gave out in the middle of a piece? What if someone recognized her? The questions swirled in her mind like a storm. She had worked so hard to disappear. She had built a new life, a safe life, a life where no one expected anything from her. If she played tonight, all of that could unravel in an instant. But then she thought about the children. The ones who would benefit from the money raised tonight. She thought about herself at 7 years old, sitting at that cheap keyboard in her grandmother's living room, teaching herself to play by ear because her family could not afford lessons. She remembered the first time a teacher had heard her play and told her she had a gift. She remembered how music had saved her, had given her a purpose, had lifted her out of poverty and into a life she never could have imagined. Could she really walk away and let those children lose this chance? Could she live with herself if she did? The ambulance arrived. The paramedics loaded the young pianist onto a stretcher and took him away. Darlene stood in the hallway, her phone silent now, her eyes red and swollen. She had run out of options. There was no one left to call. Elena watched her for a long moment. She thought about all the times in her life when someone had taken a chance on her. Her grandmother, who had spent her savings on that keyboard. Her first teacher, who had given her free lessons because she believed in her talent. The scholarship committee that had sent her to the conservatory in Milan. The concert promoter who had given her first big break. So many people had believed in her, had helped her, had given her opportunities she did not deserve. Maybe it was time to give something back. She took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking, her heart was still racing. But she made a decision. She would not let fear control her anymore, not tonight. She stepped out of the shadows and walked toward Darlene. The hotel manager looked up, confused. She knew Elena as the piano tuner, nothing more. A quiet woman who came and went without making a fuss. Why was she approaching her now, in the middle of this crisis? Elena spoke softly. Her voice was steady, even though inside she felt like she might fall apart at any moment. She told Darlene that she could help, that she could play. Darlene blinked. She did not understand. The piano tuner? Playing at the gala? It did not make sense. She started to shake her head to explain that this was a professional event, that they needed someone with real experience, someone who could handle the pressure. But Elena held her gaze. She did not argue. She did not explain. She simply asked Darlene to trust her. There was something in Elena's eyes, something Darlene had never noticed before, a quiet confidence. A depth that seemed out of place in a woman who tuned pianos for a living. Darlene hesitated. She looked around at the empty hallway, at the closed doors, at the chaos still unfolding in the kitchen. She had no other options, none at all. Finally, she nodded. Elena asked for just one thing. She did not want her name announced. She did not want any introduction. She would simply walk to the piano when the time came and play. That was all. Darlene agreed. She was too desperate to ask questions, too exhausted to wonder why a piano tuner would make such a strange request. Elena turned and walked away, her heart pounding louder than ever. She had less than 2 hours to prepare, less than 2 hours before she would sit at that Steinway and play for the first time in front of an audience in over 3 years. She had no idea if she was ready, but she knew, deep in her bones, that she had to try. Elena found an empty storage room at the end of the service hallway. She closed the door behind her and leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Her hands were trembling. Her whole body was trembling. What had she just done? What had she agreed to? For a long moment she stood there in the darkness, surrounded by stacks of folded tablecloths and boxes of candles. She could hear the muffled sounds of the hotel coming to life around her. Footsteps in the hallway, dishes clattering in the kitchen, the distant hum of conversation from the ballroom. In less than 2 hours, she would walk out there and sit at that piano, in front of 300 people. People who expected a professional performance. People who had paid thousands of dollars for their seats. She pressed her palms against her face and tried to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady, the way her therapist had taught her during those dark months after the accident. Back when the panic attacks came almost every day, back when she could not even look at a piano without feeling like the walls were closing in. She had come so far since then. She had rebuilt her strength. She had taught herself to play again, note by note, scale by scale. But this was different. This was not practicing alone in her cottage with the curtains drawn. This was real. This was public. This was everything she had spent 3 years running away from. A knock on the door made her jump. She opened it to find one of the housekeeping staff, a young woman with a kind face and curious eyes. Darlene had sent her. She was holding a garment bag and a small makeup kit. The young woman explained that Darlene thought Elena might want to freshen up before the performance. She offered the garment bag with an apologetic smile. It was a dress from the hotel's Lost and Found, she said. Guests sometimes left things behind. This one had been sitting in storage for over a year. Nobody had ever claimed it. Elena took the bag and thanked her. The young woman nodded and disappeared back down the hallway, leaving Elena alone again. She unzipped the garment bag slowly. Inside was a simple black dress, nothing fancy, no sequins or beading, just clean lines and soft fabric that looked like it would fall just below the knee. It was elegant in a quiet way. The kind of dress that did not demand attention, but earned it anyway. Elena held it up against her body and looked at her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the back of the door. She barely recognized herself. She was still wearing her work clothes, a gray cardigan buttoned up to her chin, a plain white blouse underneath. Her hair was pulled back in its usual tight bun. Her reading glasses sat on her nose even though she did not need them to see. This was the disguise she had built for herself, the armor she wore to keep the world at a distance, but tonight she would have to take it off. She changed slowly, her fingers clumsy with nerves. The dress fit better than she expected. It hugged her shoulders and waist, then flowed loosely around her hips. She reached up and pulled the elastic from her hair, letting it fall around her face. It was longer than it used to be, streaked with silver now, but still thick and wavy. She ran her fingers through it, trying to smooth out the tangles. The makeup kit was simple, just the basics. A bit of powder, some mascara, a soft pink lipstick. Elena had not worn makeup in years. She had stopped caring about how she looked the moment she left her old life behind. But now, standing in front of that mirror, she felt something shift inside her. A memory, a feeling, a ghost of the woman she used to be. She applied the makeup carefully, her hands steadier now. When she was finished, she took off her reading glasses and set them on the shelf. Then she looked at herself again. The woman staring back at her was not the piano tuner. Not the invisible nobody who slipped in and out of the hotel without anyone noticing. This woman looked like someone with a story, someone with a past, someone who had once stood on the greatest stages in the world and made people weep with the beauty of her music. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away. There was no time for crying. Not now. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, the woman who had spent an entire month's savings on that second-hand keyboard because she believed her granddaughter had a gift. Her grandmother had passed away 10 years ago, just before Elena's career reached its peak. She never got to see her granddaughter play at Carnegie Hall. She never got to sit in the front row and watch the standing ovations. But Elena knew without a doubt that her grandmother was with her tonight. She could feel her presence in the room, warm and steady, like a hand on her shoulder. She whispered a few words into the silence, a promise, a prayer. She told her grandmother that she would try, that she would be brave, that she would not let fear win. Not tonight. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was time. Elena opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The noise of the hotel washed over her like a wave. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear music playing. The gala had begun. Guests were mingling in the ballroom, sipping champagne, admiring the auction items on display. They had no idea what had happened backstage, no idea that the evening had almost fallen apart. No idea that a woman they had never noticed was about to walk onto that stage and change everything. Darlene met her near the service entrance to the ballroom. The hotel manager's eyes widened when she saw Elena. For a moment, she did not speak. She just stared, as if she was seeing a completely different person. Elena offered a small smile. She asked if everything was ready. Darlene nodded slowly. She said the auction would begin in about 30 minutes. The Steinway was the final item. When the bidding started, Elena would walk out and take her place at the piano. No introduction, no announcement, just the music. Elena thanked her. She meant it. Darlene had taken a chance on her, a huge chance, without knowing anything about her past. That kind of trust was rare. Elena would not forget it. She found a quiet spot near the edge of the ballroom, hidden behind a tall column draped in white fabric. From there, she could see the room without being seen. The space was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm golden light over everything. Round tables filled the floor, each one decorated with white roses and flickering candles. Women in gowns and men in tuxedos moved through the crowd like figures in a painting. The Steinway sat on a raised platform at the front of the room, its polished black surface gleaming under the lights. Elena watched and waited. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands had stopped shaking. She felt calm now, focused, ready. She thought about what she would play. She had not had time to prepare anything specific, no sheet music, no rehearsal. She would have to trust her memory, her instincts, her years of training. She decided on Chopin, the Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, but it was also one of the most beautiful. She had played it hundreds of times, at concerts, at competitions, at her grandmother's funeral, alone in an empty church, with tears streaming down her face. The piece was part of her. It lived in her bones, in her blood, in every fiber of her being. If she was going to play tonight, she would play something that mattered, something real, something true. The auctioneer stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. The bidding was about to begin. Elena took one last breath. Then she stepped out from behind the column and began to walk toward the piano. The walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step seemed to take forever. The ballroom stretched out before her, endless and glittering, filled with faces she did not recognize. 300 pairs of eyes, 300 strangers, all of them watching her move across the polished floor. She kept her gaze forward. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at the waiters standing along the walls or the auctioneer waiting on the stage. She looked only at the piano, the beautiful Steinway, sitting there under the lights, waiting for her like an old friend. A few people whispered as she passed. She could hear fragments of their conversations. "Who is she? Is that the pianist? I thought it was supposed to be a young man." She ignored them all. It did not matter what they thought. It did not matter what they expected. The only thing that mattered was the music. She reached the platform and climbed the 3 small steps. The Steinway gleamed in front of her, its black surface reflecting the chandelier light like a mirror. She ran her fingers along the edge of the lid, feeling the smooth wood beneath her skin. This was real. This was happening. After 3 years of hiding, 3 years of silence, she was about to play again. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The seat was slightly too high. She reached underneath and lowered it just a little until it felt right. Her feet found the pedals. Her hands rested in her lap. She closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath. The room was quiet now. The whispers had stopped. The clink of glasses had faded. Even the waiters stood still, watching, waiting. Everyone could feel that something was about to happen. Something unexpected. Something special. Elena thought about her grandmother one more time. She pictured her face, wrinkled and kind, smiling the way she always did when Elena played for her. She heard her voice, soft and warm, saying the words she had said 1,000 times. "Play from your heart, child. That is where the music lives." She opened her eyes. She lifted her hands, and she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated into the air like a question, soft, gentle, almost hesitant. The melody wandered through the room, delicate as a whisper, searching for something it could not name. A few guests leaned forward in their seats. Others set down their champagne glasses. The sound was unlike anything they had expected. It was not just music, it was a feeling. A memory. A dream. Elena let her fingers move on their own. She did not think about technique or timing or the hundreds of hours she had spent practicing this piece. She simply played. The notes flowed through her like water, like breath, like something alive. Her left hand, the one that had been damaged in the accident, moved across the keys with a grace she had thought was lost forever. There was no pain, no stiffness, only music. The piece built slowly, layer by layer, like a story being told. The opening melody gave way to something darker, more urgent. The tempo quickened. The chords grew heavier. Elena's fingers danced across the keyboard, flying from one end to the other, filling the room with sound. The guests sat frozen in their seats, barely breathing, completely captivated. She thought about everything she had been through. The years of fame and success, the accident that had taken it all away, the months of pain and despair, the slow, agonizing journey back to the piano. All of it poured out through her fingers. All of it became part of the music. The ballroom disappeared. The guests disappeared. The chandeliers and the candles and the white roses all faded into nothing. There was only Elena and the piano. Only the conversation between her hands and the keys. Only the sound, rising and falling, swelling and retreating, telling a story that words could never capture. She reached the heart of the piece, the section that had always moved her the most. The melody slowed, became tender, almost fragile. It was the sound of loss, of longing, of love that had no words. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she did not stop. She let them fall. She let the emotion pour out of her, unfiltered and raw. Somewhere in the audience, a woman pressed a hand to her mouth. A man in a gray suit wiped his eyes with a napkin. At a table near the back, an elderly couple held hands and wept together. The music had reached inside them. It had touched something deep and true, something they had forgotten they still carried. Elena played on. The piece built toward its climax, the notes crashing like waves against a rocky shore. Her fingers flew across the keys, faster and faster, filling the room with a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the walls. The chandeliers trembled. The candle flames flickered. The very air seemed to vibrate with the force of the music. And then, suddenly, everything changed. The storm passed, the chaos settled, the melody returned, soft and sweet, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Elena slowed her playing, letting each note hang in the air for just a moment longer. The piece wound down, gentle and peaceful, until finally, she played the last chord. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Elena sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes still wet with tears. She did not move. She did not breathe. She did not know what would happen next. And then the room exploded. The applause hit her like a physical force. It came from everywhere at once, a roar of sound that filled the ballroom and echoed off the walls. People leaped to their feet, chairs scraped against the floor, voices shouted, hands clapped. The noise was deafening, overwhelming, unlike anything Elena had experienced in years. She looked up, blinking, trying to understand what was happening. Every single person in the room was standing. Every single person was clapping. Some were crying openly. Others were laughing with joy. A woman in a red gown threw her hands in the air. A man in a tuxedo whistled through his fingers. The auctioneer stood at the edge of the stage, his mouth hanging open, his notes forgotten in his hand. Darlene was there too, near the back of the room. Elena could see her through the crowd. The hotel manager was weeping, her mascara running down her cheeks, her hands pressed together in front of her chest. She looked at Elena with an expression of pure wonder, pure gratitude, pure disbelief. The applause went on and on. It seemed like it would never stop. Elena did not know what to do. She had not expected this. She had not planned for this. She had just wanted to help. She had just wanted to play one more time for the children who would benefit from tonight's donations, for the grandmother who had believed in her, for the woman she used to be. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She turned to face the audience, the faces blurred together, a sea of smiles and tears and shining eyes. She bowed her head, just slightly, a gesture of thanks. The applause grew even louder. When she finally raised her eyes again, she saw something that made her heart stop. Near the front of the room, at a table close to the stage, an elderly man with white hair and a weathered face was staring at her. His eyes were wide, his mouth was open, and on his face was an expression of recognition. He knew who she was. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She held his gaze for just a moment, long enough to see the shock in his eyes turn to understanding. Then she looked away. She turned from the audience and walked toward the edge of the stage, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The applause continued behind her, but she barely heard it. All she could think about was the old man's face, the way he had looked at her, the way he had recognized her playing after all these years. Her secret was about to come out, and she had no idea what would happen next. Elena moved quickly through the crowd, her head down, her heart racing. She needed to get out. She needed to disappear before anyone else recognized her. The applause was still ringing in her ears, but all she could think about was escape. The service corridor, the back door, her car in the parking lot. If she could just make it outside, she could drive away and pretend this night had never happened. She was almost at the edge of the ballroom when a hand touched her arm. She turned, ready to pull away, ready to make an excuse and keep moving. But the person standing in front of her was the elderly man with the white hair, the one who had recognized her from the audience. Up close, she could see the lines on his face, the kindness in his eyes, the tears still glistening on his cheeks. He spoke her name, her real name, Elena Marchetti. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to say he was mistaken, that she was just the piano tuner, that she was nobody special. But the words would not come. She stood there, frozen, unable to speak. The old man smiled gently. He told her not to be afraid. He said he was not going to cause her any trouble. He just wanted her to know that he remembered her, that he had been at her final concert in Vienna, the one she gave just weeks before the accident. He said it was the most beautiful performance he had ever witnessed in his 60 years of writing about music. Elena stared at him. She did not understand. Writing about music? The old man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. He handed it to her. His name was printed on the front, along with the words, "Retired Music Critic." He had spent his career reviewing concerts and operas for newspapers and magazines across Europe and America. He had heard every great pianist of the last half-century, and he told Elena, with tears in his eyes, that she was one of the finest he had ever encountered. She did not know what to say. She held the card in her trembling fingers and tried to find words, but her throat was too tight. All those years of hiding, all those years of believing her career was over, that she was forgotten, that the world had moved on without her. And here was this man, this stranger, telling her that she still mattered, that her music still mattered. Before she could respond, she heard footsteps behind her, then voices, then more footsteps. She turned and saw a small crowd forming, guests from the gala drawn by the commotion, curious about the woman who had played so beautifully. They gathered around her, their faces eager and excited. Someone asked if it was true. Was she really Elena Marchetti, the famous pianist who had disappeared 3 years ago? The old man nodded. He confirmed it. He told the crowd that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a legend returning from the shadows, a musician the world thought was gone forever, playing with more passion and soul than ever before. The whispers spread like fire through the ballroom. Elena Marchetti. Elena Marchetti. The name passed from table to table, from guest to guest, until everyone in the room knew who she was. People pulled out their phones and searched for her name. They found old concert footage, old interviews, old photographs of a younger woman in elegant gowns, standing on stages around the world. They looked at the woman in front of them, older now, simpler, but unmistakably the same. Elena felt exposed, vulnerable, like a wound that had been torn open after years of careful healing. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. But something kept her feet planted on the floor. Maybe it was the faces around her, the warmth in their eyes, the genuine admiration and gratitude she saw there. These people were not judging her. They were not pitying her. They were celebrating her. Darlene pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Elena. The hotel manager was sobbing, her whole body shaking. She kept saying thank you, over and over again. Thank you for saving the night. Thank you for the music. Thank you for being brave enough to step forward when no one else could. Elena hugged her back. She felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight and heavy for years. She realized, standing there in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by strangers who felt like friends, that she had been carrying a weight she did not need to carry anymore. The fear, the shame, the belief that she was broken beyond repair. She had let those things define her for too long. The auctioneer returned to the stage, still looking stunned. He picked up his microphone and cleared his throat. The room fell quiet. He announced that the bidding for the Steinway was about to begin. But before they started, he wanted to acknowledge the incredible performance they had all just witnessed. He asked the crowd to give one more round of applause for the pianist who had made this night unforgettable. The room erupted again. The sound washed over Elena like a warm wave. She closed her eyes and let it fill her. Let it heal the broken places inside her that she had thought would never mend. When the applause finally faded, the auctioneer began the bidding. The numbers climbed quickly. 10,000, 20,000, 30, 40, 50. The guests raised their paddles with enthusiasm, driven by the emotion of the evening, by the magic of what they had experienced. The bidding climbed higher and higher, past every expectation, past every record the gala had ever set. When the final paddle fell, the Steinway had sold for $220,000, more than 4 times its estimated value. The room burst into cheers. Darlene collapsed into a chair, laughing and crying at the same time. The money would change lives. It would buy instruments for children who had none. It would pay for lessons and scholarships and opportunities that would have been impossible otherwise. Elena watched it all from the edge of the room. She felt a peace she had not known in years. She had not planned any of this. She had not asked for recognition or praise. She had simply wanted to help. And somehow, in doing so, she had found something she thought she had lost forever. Not fame, not glory, something deeper, something more important. She had found herself again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached her one after another to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her how much her music had meant to them. A young woman with tears in her eyes said that Elena's playing had reminded her of her mother, who had passed away the year before. An older gentleman said he had given up piano as a teenager and now wanted to start again. A little girl, no more than 8 or 9, tugged on Elena's dress and asked if she would teach her to play someday. Elena knelt down and looked into the child's eyes. She saw herself there. The little girl from the poor village in Italy. The child who had learned to play on a second-hand keyboard. The dreamer who had believed that music could change her life. She smiled and told the girl yes. Someday, she would teach her. The gala ended late that night. The guests went home. The staff cleaned up the ballroom. The candles burned down to nothing. But Elena stayed a little longer, sitting alone at the Steinway, running her fingers over the keys one last time. She did not return to the concert circuit. She did not go back to the international stage. That life belonged to someone she used to be. But she did accept a new role. The charity foundation, grateful for what she had done, offered her a position teaching piano to scholarship students at the local community center, children from poor families. Children with big dreams and no way to reach them on their own. She said yes. Every week, she sat with those children and taught them scales and chords and simple melodies. She watched their faces light up when they played their first song. She heard echoes of her grandmother in their laughter, in their mistakes, in their stubborn determination to get it right. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had spent years hiding from the world, years believing she was broken, years thinking that the best part of her life was over. But she had been wrong. The best part was just beginning.